There are over 500,000 clay tablets hidden in museums across the globe, containing the world's first recorded thoughts. The problem? Almost no one can read them.
500,000 clay tablets sat in museum storage rooms for over a century, and almost nobody could read them. The script was too complex, the dialects too ancient, the knowledge too rare. Then artificial intelligence cracked them open, and what came out was not what anyone expected. 5,000 years ago, one civilization buried its most important knowledge underground and left it waiting. The question keeping researchers awake is not how they knew to preserve it. It is why they were so certain someone would come looking. The machine that cracked the code. For most of recorded history, 500,000 clay tablets sat in museum storage rooms around the world and said almost nothing to almost anyone. The script pressed into their surfaces was so demanding, so layered, with shifting dialects and thousands of unique signs that fewer than a few hundred specialists on the entire planet were qualified to read it. A single tablet could contain more than 1,000 distinct symbols. The scribal handwriting styles changed across centuries. The grammar had no surviving native speakers left to consult. Translating one tablet properly could consume years of a scholar's working life, and the archive was enormous beyond any realistic hope of completion. That wall came down in the early 2020s. Machine learning models trained at universities in Munich, Tel Aviv, and Ariel began doing in hours what used to take years. By 2023, an artificial intelligence built specifically for Akkadian, one of the primary languages written in cuneiform, could produce near-instant English translations directly from raw tablet scans. The tool was not simply matching symbols to a dictionary. It learned to detect idioms, recognize individual scribal handwriting styles, infer grammatical structure from damaged sections, and flag terminology that did not fit the expected context of the passage. One technology publication described it as combining Google Translate with a time machine. By 2025, tools developed at Würzburg University pushed further still. The new systems could isolate technical terminology embedded inside passages that had previously been processed as religious poetry, recovering semantic layers that human translators had missed entirely for generations. They could now detect when a passage was using a precise technical term that had simply been misread as a metaphor, because nothing in the scholarly framework had anticipated finding that kind of language in those texts. At the exact same moment the translation tools were improving, fieldwork was producing the best raw material the models had ever processed. A collection of pristinely preserved tablets discovered at Kurd Khalstan in northern Iraq, dated to approximately 1,800 BCE, but believed to be transcriptions of far older source material, gave researchers master reference texts. At Girsu, one of Sumer's founding cities, more than 200 untouched tablets were recovered from bitumen-lined containers, still intact after 4,000 years underground. These finds did not simply expand the archive. They provided calibration benchmarks that made the artificial intelligence translation sharper across every other tablet in the system simultaneously. The practical consequence was immediate and sweeping. Passages that had sat unchallenged in established scholarly categories for over a century began producing, under the new translation frameworks, specific and repeatable terminology that did not belong in the category it had been assigned to. The archive had not changed. The tools reading it had, and what those tools were finding was fundamentally different from what the previous generation of scholars had reported. This civilization did not evolve gradually like others. It appeared suddenly, organized, advanced, and fully formed, in a place where nothing like it had existed before, making its rapid emergence one of archaeology's most unusual mysteries. The civilization that arrived fully formed. 6,000 years ago, in the floodplain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now southern Iraq, a people who called themselves the Black-Headed Ones emerged, and they moved toward complexity at a speed that has no real parallel anywhere else in the archaeological record. Within a span of time that is barely measurable in archaeological terms, they had cities, legal codes, organized astronomical observation programs, stratified governance, and a writing system so sophisticated it was not a simple notation tool, but a full mathematical and linguistic architecture. Every other early civilization shows the expected developmental pattern. Egypt moved toward literacy over centuries. The Indus Valley, China, and the Mesoamerican cultures all display the slow, incremental progression that archaeologists expect when a society is building from scratch. Sumer does not show that curve. The scribal tradition appears in the record early, dense, and technically advanced, as though the practice had already been established somewhere before the tablets we have actually found. The writing itself carries a base 60 numerical system embedded inside it, and that system gave the world 60-second minutes, 60-minute hours, and the 360-degree circle still in use in navigation, engineering, and astronomy today. The raw material was mud. Ordinary river silt shaped into bricks built entire city-states, Eridu, Uruk, and among them. The same mud pressed into tablets while wet and then baked turned out to be one of the most durable information storage media in human history. While papyrus decomposed and wood rotted, fired clay survived millennia in the ground without structural degradation. The act of discarding a used tablet in a trash pit was, completely accidentally, a form of preservation, which is precisely why more Sumerian tablets exist today than written records from any other ancient culture combined. What made the earliest tablets strange was not simply their sophistication. It was the range of what they recorded. Tax records and grain inventories share tablet collections with detailed astronomical observation logs, medical protocols, and passages with no clear administrative purpose at all. Something was being preserved beyond the operational requirements of running a city-state. Someone was recording things that did not need to be recorded for practical governance, and they were doing it systematically over a very long time. Hidden within those tablets were descriptions of forces and processes far ahead of their time, suggesting the Sumerians understood ideas science would only name thousands of years later. Stone records of a forgotten science. When the new translation tools began processing the astronomical sections of the Sumerian tablets, researchers expected seasonal calendars and basic star charts. What emerged went considerably beyond that. The tablets contained precise records of planetary motion, tracked solstices, and documented Earth's axial precession, the slow 26,000-year wobble of the planet's rotational axis that shifts the apparent position of the night sky over vast spans of time. Capturing precession meaningfully requires systematic observation across multiple human generations and an institutional framework capable of transmitting that data reliably. The Sumerians had both, and the question that raises is one archaeology has not yet answered satisfactorily. The medical records produced a similar unsettling pattern. Tablets described antiseptic protocols, trauma care procedures, and diagnostic techniques including pulse measurement, organized less like folk remedy collections and more like systematized clinical practice. They also recorded family health histories in formats implying awareness of inherited physical traits, anticipating the conceptual foundation of genetic medicine by roughly 4,000 years. Then the electrical passages surfaced. Several tablets described copper and iron vessels submerged in acidic solutions, using terminology the AI frameworks flagged as approximating current, spark, and powerful glow. The Baghdad battery, a physical artifact recovered from Iraq and dated to a comparable period, matches this description with a precision that makes coincidence an uncomfortable explanation. Alongside these were references to stones that scorched the earth and poisoned fields for generations, which the texts said required burial deep underground to contain their ongoing danger. Modern researchers have connected some of these to desert glass, fused quartz formations requiring temperatures achievable only through meteorite impact or extreme concentrated heat. The tablets do not frame these as past catastrophes that were survived and recovered from. They frame the affected areas as active, ongoing hazards requiring institutional management, implying sustained memory of what happened and deliberate record-keeping about why it still mattered. The scientific knowledge in the tablets was impressive, but it was only a small part of the story. The Sumerians went further, claiming to record the origins of humanity itself with a level of detail that is hard to ignore. Adamu and the language of a lab. The Sumerian creation texts, the Atrahasis and the Eridu Genesis, do not present human origins as a theological mystery. They present it as a documented operational event with specific causes, named actors, and a recorded outcome. A lower-tier class of divine workers called the Agigi were assigned the physical work of maintaining the world's agricultural and hydraulic systems. They revolted. The senior divine hierarchy, the Anunnaki, needed a replacement workforce fast. Their solution was to engineer one by combining clay with what the texts call divine essence, and the name given to the first resulting being was Adamu. That name, appearing independently across multiple cultures thousands of years later, is a documented pattern scholars of comparative religion have never fully explained. The first prototypes failed. They were sterile, cognitively limited, and not functional. What follows in the tablets is a sequence of modification, testing, and iterative adjustment until a version emerged capable of reproduction and complex task performance. Most ancient creation accounts describe a single act. The Sumerian account describes a process with identifiable failure states and engineered corrections. It reads structurally like a development log. When the AI translation tools processed these passages, they flagged terminology that human translators had previously softened into mythological phrasing. The terms read in precise translation as something approximating essence mixture, prototype yield, and reproductive capacity. Whether they represent genuine technical documentation or a framework for encoding cosmological beliefs through biological analogy is the central unresolved question, and the new translations have made it harder to dismiss rather than easier. Zecharia Sitchin's ancient astronaut theory is rejected by mainstream archaeology on multiple grounds, including disputed translations. However, the technical specificity now being isolated by AI systems has complicated the established consensus. The chromosome 2 fusion argument, which fringe theorists cite alongside the tablets, refers to an anomaly in which two ancestral primate chromosomes appear to have merged in the human lineage. Mainstream genetics explains this through natural evolutionary processes. The debate continues at the margins specifically because the Sumerian texts keep producing language that does not sit cleanly in either camp. If the beings who allegedly created humanity did not disappear, the tablets suggest they had a plan for what came next. The first kings were not described as ordinary human rulers, but as something entirely different, with reigns marked by numbers that are difficult to explain as simple symbolism. Sky Kings and the obsession with pure blood. The Sumerian king list is one of the most remarkable documents in the entire archaeological record, and what makes it remarkable is not what most people expect. The first king, Alulim, reigned for 28,800 years. His successor reigned for 36,000. The first 8 kings, all ruling before the Great Flood, accumulate total reign times in the hundreds of thousands of years, stated plainly without any apparent awareness that they should require explanation. After the flood, the numbers change. The reign lengths shrink consistently with each successive generation until the list arrives at historical rulers whose reigns span decades rather than millennia. The decrease follows a measurable downward trajectory. Something is being tracked as it diminishes across generations, and whatever that something is, the people recording the list considered it worth documenting with precision. The mainstream explanation is that the extreme reign lengths encode divine legitimacy symbolically. The competing reading interprets the decreasing curve as a hybrid lineage becoming progressively more human with each generation, as an original non-human genetic contribution dilutes over time. Neither reading can be settled from the tablets alone. Physical archaeology introduced a complication that fits neither framework cleanly. In Queen Puabi's tomb at Ur, dated to approximately 2600 BCE, excavators found a naturally elongated skull with elongation that did not result from intentional cranial binding, a practice that leaves a different and identifiable morphological signature. Nearby skeletal remains measured over 7 feet in height. Both are statistical outliers in the Sumerian population record, with no fully satisfying conventional explanation. What the texts are unambiguous about is an institutional obsession with lineage preservation. References to a sky bloodline appear across dozens of tablets, not as ceremonial poetry, but as the legal foundation for dynastic marriage protocols, succession rules, and purity requirements, encoded into enforceable law. Egyptian pharaohs claimed descent from divine beings, Incan rulers from the sun, Tibetan leadership from celestial reincarnation. What separates Sumer is that Sumer wrote the policy down in enough detail that it survived. The bloodlines traced upward to a sky filled with named, ranked, and rivalrous beings, organized so precisely it read less like mythology and more like a system governing the cosmos itself. 300 gods and the system behind them. The Sumerian pantheon is best understood not as a collection of supernatural personalities, but as a mapped power structure. It was a cosmic governance model with defined jurisdictions, ranked authority, and institutional roles that mirrored and formalized the political systems of the city-states operating beneath it. Every major divine figure held a specific domain, not nature in the abstract, but a specific river, a specific category of law, a specific branch of technical knowledge. The correspondence between divine jurisdiction and earthly administrative function was not a poetic coincidence. It was the explicit organizing principle of the system. At the top sat executive cosmic authority, the god whose origin myth begins with the separation of heaven and earth as a founding act of governance, a constitutional moment rather than a magical event. Below that sat a technical and administrative tier whose mythological portfolios read, in precise translation, as job descriptions, freshwater management, metallurgical craft knowledge, legal adjudication, agricultural system design. The pantheon was a bureaucracy that came with a creation story to explain why it had the authority it claimed. What is consistently underweighted in popular accounts of Sumerian religion is how much of the operational structure was female. The goddess who held simultaneous jurisdiction over political power and military outcome was among the most operationally significant figures in the entire system. A goddess of healing was invoked at childbirth and medical intervention. The divine scribe, keeper of celestial records and cosmic knowledge, was female. The first named individual author in all of recorded human history was a woman. Her name was Enheduanna. She lived around 2285 BCE, and she was a high priestess and theological writer whose hymns survive with full attribution. None of this fits the common assumption that ancient religious systems were primarily structured around male authority. Sumer's documented record consistently contradicts that assumption. By the time the Babylonians reorganized Sumerian theology into the Enuma Elish, the named divine figures exceeded 300, and that number continues to grow. Every new cache of tablets introduces previously unknown figures, minor deities with jurisdiction over specific springs, individual marshes, particular seasonal wind, entities that had not appeared in any prior text. The more the archive is processed, the more the pantheon looks less like mythology and more like a census of a detailed cosmological worldview documenting real administrative structures. These gods were recorded alongside precise accounts of catastrophes that ended ages, collapsed empires, and altered the sky, not as legends, but as evidence left for those who came next. The survival manual they buried in stone. The Sumerian understanding of time was not linear. It was cyclical. History moved through great ages, each rising to complexity and then collapsing under catastrophe before beginning again. From the perspective of the people recording it, this was observable fact, not philosophical speculation. The 4.2 kiloyear event, a catastrophic multi-decade drought around 2200 BCE, has been confirmed by modern climate science through ice core samples, sediment layers, and lakebed geological records. The timing corresponds precisely to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. Tablets from this era describe red skies, a blackened sun, and rivers reversing their flow. For generations, scholars classified these as poetic dramatization of agricultural failure. Current translation work is reclassifying them as potential descriptions of real atmospheric phenomena, the kind produced by volcanic events or high-altitude particulate injection from impacts significant enough to register in the global climate record. The imagery is too consistent across multiple tablet collections to maintain the metaphor classification without serious scrutiny. What is emerging is a structural pattern. The disaster accounts were not isolated narrative. They were cataloged with enough regularity and internal consistency that they functioned as pattern documentation. Contemporary scholars have started calling this category of tablet survival guides. The Sumerians documented the sequence in which collapse arrived, what the sky looked like beforehand, what water systems did, what soil productivity looked like in the years preceding failure, and in what order the critical systems broke down. They were writing a warning for people who had not yet experienced what they had. The evidence of deliberate preservation makes this impossible to dismiss. A significant portion of these tablets were found in sealed containers, buried in ways that were clearly intentional. The best preserved portions of the archive contain precisely the most urgent content: disaster sequences, cyclical timing records, atmospheric warning indicators. What they preserved most carefully was put underground as a transmission aimed at a reader they believed would eventually exist, one with the tools to process what they were saying. What has been recovered so far may represent only a fraction of what was originally produced. The most significant thing the Sumerians ever recorded may still be sitting undisturbed beneath Iraqi soil, waiting for the moment those tools finally arrive. Every time a new tablet surfaces, the story shifts in a direction nobody predicted. The machines are reading faster now, and what they are finding keeps changing the picture. Drop your thoughts in the comments below because we genuinely want to know what you think.